Everyone saw the headlines. Red Bull finally hits the track. Ferrari gets its first laps. But what no one really showed you is what the rest of the grid was doing. Because on day 2 of preseason testing, one of the most important days before the season begins, 8 out of 10 teams never turned a wheel. No live onboard footage. No timing data. No updates from the garages. Just silence, on a day when silence usually means something's gone wrong. And the two teams that did run? Red Bull and Ferrari. But even they weren't pushing. Verstappen went off early, brought out a red flag. Leclerc ran clean laps, but stayed far from the limit. It didn't look like performance testing. It looked like two teams trying to gather just enough data before the rain ruined everything. Meanwhile, the rest of the field stayed locked behind closed shutters. No McLaren. No Mercedes. No Audi, Cadillac, Alpine, Haas. Not even an installation lap from most of them. It was as if day 2 had been cancelled behind the scenes, and no one told the fans. The official excuse? Rain. But rain alone doesn't stop Formula 1. Not when you've got millions in upgrades to validate, and just a handful of days before the first race of the season. So the question is, if this day mattered so much, why did almost no one show up? And what's happening behind the garage doors? That they're not ready for the world to see? Day 2 of preseason testing should have been straightforward. A chance for teams to build on day 1 data, compare performance in consistent conditions, and begin pressure testing their 2026 designs. Instead, it felt like a day Formula 1 didn't want you to pay attention to. The morning started cold and cloudy, not ideal, but not unusual for Barcelona in February. Rain was expected later in the day, which meant the early hours were critical. Get the car out. Run your programs. Collect what you can before the track turns to ice. But by 9 a.m., it was already clear that something was off. Only two teams had cars prepped in the pit lane, Red Bull and Ferrari. Every other garage stayed sealed, no tires on trolleys, no engines fired up, no mechanics outside. Nothing. At first, it looked like delay. Maybe some were waiting for a dryer line. But the hours passed, and the silence continued. No Mercedes. No McLaren. No Aston Martin. No newcomers like Audi or Cadillac. Ferrari and Red Bull ran slow laps under increasingly difficult conditions. Max Verstappen had a minor off, a trip through the gravel at turn 5. Charles Leclerc kept it tidy, logging steady laps without pushing the car's limits. It was cautious, and that's what made it strange. Because even the teams on track didn't look like they wanted to be. And behind the scenes, that silence wasn't just about rain. Teams weren't talking. Media access was tighter than usual. No lap-by-lap data feed. No comments from the FIA. It felt like everyone had agreed, without saying it, that day 2 didn't need to be seen. But it did happen. And the few who did run might have just gained a critical advantage before the rest even left the garage. When Red Bull finally rolled out of the garage, it wasn't with urgency. It wasn't aggressive. And it definitely wasn't about lap times. Max Verstappen was in the car, and that alone drew attention. After sitting out large portions of day 1, this was supposed to be Red Bull's real start. But from the very first laps, it was clear they weren't chasing headlines. Short runs. Long cooldowns. And engine modes that looked deliberately restrained. Then came the moment everyone clipped and reposted. Turn 5. Cold tires. Low grip. Verstappen ran wide, dipped into the gravel, and triggered a red flag. Not a crash, but enough to remind everyone how unforgiving these new cars are when conditions aren't perfect. Red Bull didn't panic. No rush in the garage. No visible concern. The car came back, checks were done, and they sent him out again. But after that, the approach became even more conservative. The fastest time Max managed was around 1 minute and 20 seconds. On paper, it looks underwhelming. But that number is misleading. Fuel loads were unknown. Deployment was clearly limited. And more importantly, Red Bull didn't care about the stopwatch. What they cared about was correlation. How the car behaved in poor conditions. How the floor reacted on a damp track. How the hybrid system delivered power when grip disappeared. This wasn't testing speed, it was testing understanding. And that's the part no one really talked about. Because while other teams stayed hidden in their garages, Red Bull was quietly learning things no simulator can fully replicate. Even on a bad day. Even in the rain. They didn't leave day 2 with the fastest lap. They left with answers. And in a regulation reset like this, answers are worth more than any headline time. While Red Bull drew attention with Verstappen's off-track moment, Ferrari went the opposite way. No drama. No mistakes. No unnecessary risks. Charles Leclerc finally got his hands on the SF26, the car Ferrari has spent months hyping as their boldest design yet. And when it hit the track, it didn't look radical. It looked Calm, balanced, stable, and surprisingly quiet. He clocked a best lap of 1 minute and 20.8 seconds before the rain settled in, just under a second off Verstappen's time. But again, lap times were irrelevant. Leclerc wasn't pushing. This wasn't a performance run. It was systems validation, checking cooling flow, power deployment, brake temperatures, and aero behavior under partial load. What stood out, though, wasn't just how the car looked. It was how Leclerc drove it. No snap oversteer. No corrections mid-corner. No sudden losses of grip. In conditions where one mistake could have cost the whole day, the SF26 looked predictable, and that's a rare compliment in February testing. Even in wet conditions, Ferrari kept running. They swapped from slicks to intermediates to full wets as the track changed, always staying within a tight performance window. They logged 45 laps by the end of the day, more than Red Bull, more than most teams managed in both sessions combined. But perhaps the most interesting part? Ferrari didn't try to show anything off. There were no media stunts. No bold statements. No push laps to grab attention. It was controlled, almost cold. And when a team that's been under pressure for years suddenly chooses restraint, when they stop talking and start logging laps quietly in the background, it usually means one of two things. Either they're lost, or they're far more confident than they're letting on. By the end of day 2, Ferrari looked like a team that knew exactly what it was doing, and wasn't ready to show the full picture just yet. By midday, it became clear most of the grid wasn't going to run. Not even a systems check. No installation laps. Just total silence. McLaren didn't show. Again. That's 2 full days without a single lap on track. Officially, they're waiting for the right conditions, a dry track, better grip, optimal setup. But when you've got a world championship to defend, skipping half of preseason testing raises more questions than it answers. Mercedes? Same story. After a strong day 1 with Antonelli, they chose not to run at all in the wet. Maybe that's smart. Maybe it's calculated. But skipping day 2, when the rest of the grid is still figuring out how these power units behave in low temperatures, means you're handing data away to your rivals. Then there's Audi and Cadillac. Both new entries. Both under enormous pressure to validate brand new systems, from chassis integration to hybrid deployment. And yet, neither team completed a single lap on day 2. For Audi, early signs point to lingering thermal issues. For Cadillac, it's still unclear whether the car is even fully ready to run in varying conditions. Alpine, Haas, and Aston Martin also stayed in the garage. Some claimed weather wasn't worth the risk. But in a season where every team has just 5 days to understand a new formula, choosing to stay silent doesn't feel strategic, it feels like falling behind. The thing is, in 2026, testing isn't just preparation. It's survival. These cars aren't evolutions, they're reinventions. If your energy deployment is off by even 2%, your race pace collapses. If your cooling is miscalculated, you won't finish a Grand Prix. And if you're not running in the rain now, how will you react when it pours in Spa, or Suzuka, or Silverstone? What day 2 revealed, without revealing anything at all, is that some teams are either holding their cards too tightly, or they simply don't have any cards to play yet. At the end of the day, there were lap times. Verstappen was quickest, a 1 minute and 20 seconds. Leclerc just behind on a 1 minute and 20.8 seconds. But if you're still watching the time sheets to figure out who's ahead, you've already missed the point. This wasn't about speed. It was about information. Because in this generation of Formula One, with 50% electric deployment, extreme cooling margins, and compressed preseason windows, the team that learns fastest doesn't just gain pace, it gains months of competitive advantage. Red Bull walked away with key data. Not performance, not reliability, but how their car behaves in unstable grip conditions. They learned how the floor reacts to water pooling on curbs. How energy recovery affects balance when tires are 5 degrees out of the window. That kind of information can't be simulated, and now they have it. Ferrari, on the other hand, walked away with something just as valuable, confirmation. Their new power unit, the 0.676, didn't skip a beat. No shutdowns. No overheating. And crucially, no software faults. That tells us something: the foundation is stable. They can now begin chasing performance instead of fixing architecture. But the teams that stayed silent? They didn't just miss a wet day. They missed opportunity. When you skip a test session, you don't just delay your program, you compress it. More upgrades in less time. More risk, less confidence. And in a season where even top teams only get 3 real test days, that margin can become irreversible. So who gained? The teams who ran even slowly, even cautiously. Because in Formula One, the first team to understand the rules is usually the one that bends them best. And who lost? The one still waiting for perfect conditions. in a sport that never offers them. When day 2 ended, there was a sense of confusion. 2 cars ran. 8 didn't. There were no major failures. No obvious scandals. And yet, somehow, it felt like something important had just slipped past unnoticed. Because if this had been a normal year, if these were just updates on familiar platforms, a day like this would be frustrating, but forgettable. But these are not normal cars. And this is not a normal season. 2026 is supposed to be a clean slate. A technical reset. An opportunity for any team, not just Red Bull, to build something revolutionary and disrupt the grid. But that window is closing faster than most teams expected. Missing a day like this doesn't just delay a program, it limits what's possible in the early races. You can't validate your cooling system? You can't run soft tires in mixed conditions? You don't know how the powertrain responds after 25 laps of constant deployment? That's not just unfinished testing. That's a future penalty, in Bahrain, in Jeddah, in Melbourne. And what no one wants to say out loud is that some teams may have already lost their shot at starting 2026 on equal ground. Because if Red Bull and Ferrari have begun unlocking real-world data, and the others haven't, then it won't be a close race in March. It'll be a chase. One that could last the entire season. So no, day 2 wasn't quiet. It wasn't wasted. It was a filter, separating the teams who are ready from the ones who are still hoping to be. And if the silence from half the grid today was deliberate, then what are they hiding? And what happens when they run out of time to hide it?